there is not a place on this planet where theatre is not liked and theatre is not entertaining people. In this equation, how can we not discuss Africa, which is such an important paradigm in intellectual as well as performance spaces? In order to understand African theatre, we will also have to look at various kinds of undercurrents, because African continent is not a monolith that is represented by just one word, Africa, but there are so many countries, so many tribal cultures, and so many ethnic identities which have their own issues, which have their own traditions, which have their cultural heritage. So we need to understand this entire mapping. I advise you to carry forward the tropes that you pick from here and try to enhance your understanding of African theatre. So Africa has a rich heritage, as I told you. It has diverse and rich culture spanning of centuries of tradition, innovation, and cultural expression. The roots in ancient past of humanity is some kind of very emblematic identity of Africa. In fact, the greatest civilizations have taken birth in Africa, and the oldest ones also. So Homo sapiens, that is us, the humans, have connection to Africa. All that we are present on this planet have a connection with Africa. Communal practices, oral traditions, African theatre predates colonialism and serving as a means of storytelling, spiritual expression, and community cohesion. So these are the some of the representative terms that we are using for Africa here, but there is much more to talk about. There is much more to in research into and look within. Colonial impact in all these things is also visible because Africa has been a colony of various European nations. Colonialism imposed European cultural norms on Africa, but it also sparked a desire among African intellectuals and artists to reclaim their cultural heritage through theatre. So this suppression of Africa and its culture has given birth to very beautiful response from the African writers, playwrights, and theatre artists who have desired and who actively participated in the reclaiming of their cultural heritage and its representation. Then post-colonial era, after independence, African theatre evolved to reflect the complexities of newly independent nations, exploring themes of colonialism, oppression, and national identity. So these themes have also visibility in the mapping of African continent, because these themes have tried in the post-colonial era. African writers participated in the discussion of asserting the identity and putting on record the oppression that Africa underwent, the people of Africa underwent due to the colonial rule, and theatre also participated in it. The newly independent nations and their issues has also been a discussion topic in the representational theatres and plays written to assert the post-colonial reverberations. Some of the prominent playwrights like Wole Soyinka, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, and Atul Fugard used their works to address the colonial legacies and social injustices resonating with audiences globally. Contemporary diversity. So Africa is such a diverse country, it's diverse land, it's such a diverse continent that it is not just modern age that looks at its diversity as inspirational, but its diversity has been imbibed in various cultures that have emanated from Africa in performance, in costumes, in cultural heritage, etc. So the multitudes of forms, styles, and voices prevalent in the African continent from north to south, from east to west, have inspired various traditional as well as avant-garde productions. Innovation and collaboration. Digital technologies and global interconnectedness have opened new avenues for innovation and collaboration in African theatre. So these changes have allowed artists to come up with new representation of their identity, documenting their identity and assertion and struggles, and also engaging in an unprecedented ways with the world theatre and the people across the world who want to watch theatre. Now let us have a little bit of assessment of African history, a kind of a discussion which will be useful for us to put a perspective for the theatre discussion of Africa. The scramble for Africa was a watershed moment in the late 19th century, and this is marked by a fierce competition among European powers to secure colonial territories on the African continent. During the 1880s, as imperialism reached its peak, European nations embarked on a frenzy to acquire the world's last colonial strongholds. This scramble for African territories resulted in territorial gains via treaties, conquests, and diplomatic maneuvers, ultimately redrawing the map of Africa and reshaping its political landscape. Well, I am not the first one to bring in the discussion of how Africa has been scrambled for, how Africa has been fought for by the European countries in order to divide its land and resources between themselves. So especially in 1880s, that is in 19th century, imperialism was at its peak, and the division of African territories was being sought by all the different powers of Europe in a very mad way. This led to the redrawing of maps of African continent. One after the other, nations were created with straight lines as their boundaries and dividing the ethnicities of Africa in a very irrational manner, leading to civil wars, crisis, and a madness of a chaotic kind in which the African culture suffered a lot, and it left the soul of various ethnic identities and cultural regimes of Africa butchered and brutalized. So the political landscape has been reshaped, and the discussion of political landscape leads us to the discussion of plays, because in the theatre, because in this manner we try to understand why some plays were written and what was their purpose, what was their past, and how they are connected with the future worries of African nations. You can see in this map, it is visible that various kinds of countries have divided Africa amongst themselves. This is the situation of 1910. You can see the colonies of Spaniards, of the British, of the Portuguese, of the German, of the Belgian, and the French countries, which controlled Africa and ruled its not only the resources but impacted its cultural values as well. Now, looking at the divide that created that is visible in different timelines, in the different timeline in the history, that has important role to play in the understanding of African culture and African studies in theatre. So it is 1948, before 1948, because it was an era in which indigenous performance was ignored and English-speaking South Africans regarded Europe as the standard style of performance to strive for. So this was the time where African theatre, African culture was fighting a war of its assertion, war for its identity, a battle rather for its identity, struggling for its identity formation, because the theatre that was considered good and worthy of any mention was the European theatre and the standard style for things to strive for. Between 1948 to 1960, the National Party took power in 1948, ushering in the apartheid legal system. It aided the development of Afrikaans language and thus Afrikaans theatre. This weakened black South Africans' position. So this is another time period which is relevant to understand the African divide, because in this time period the National Party took over in 1948, and it ushered in the apartheid legal system, and it developed the Afrikaans language and Afrikaans theatre. Then from 1960 to 1991, South Africa became a republic and National Party's policies were implemented throughout the country, with the full impact of previous policies felt seemingly identical to the 1970s. And Nelson Mandela was released from prison in 27 February 1990, and after his release, there was a beginning of post-apartheid South Africa and had a significant impact on the country's theatre. Well, I've discussed the case of South Africa to try and understand how different kinds of political movements were going on in different countries like Nigeria, like Ethiopia, and Rwanda. All these different countries were facing different kinds of movements, Kenya, and they have their own stories to be told. They have their own things to be told. So I'll discuss these different countries in my future lectures as well. So as for now, taking the example of South African theatre, now we move towards the discussion of African theatre in the post-apartheid as well as pre-apartheid period as well. So, African drama can be divided into two types. First is the indigenous tradition, which is sometimes called traditional or indigenous drama, and the acquired tradition. This tradition is the one which has been inherited, which has evolved over the centuries in African cultures, in various ethnic tribes of Africa, because of their performance cultures and because of their rituals and belief systems. The second thing or anything other than this is called literary drama or the scripted play. So the acquired tradition or the indigenous drama is that kind of drama which takes further the cultural enhancement or the dissemination of the cultural belief systems, whereas the scripted play is the modern style plays written for the purpose of playing them on stage. You have two pictures that are presenting you the two representations of the two ideas that I have just now mentioned. Indigenous tradition. African theatre includes three early forms of theatrical practices: storytelling, dance, and ritual. These types of performances share the same basic elements: performers and performance spaces. So storytelling, how to tell stories in a different styles, performing them, dancing on stories while playing music, telling stories as a part of ritual, telling stories as a part of celebration, telling stories as a matter of habit, and uh, inheriting stories as oral literature. All this is indigenous tradition, and these are followed with dance and rituals. Sometimes dance follows the ritual, sometimes ritual follows the dance, sometimes it's dance and ritual both go together. Ritual is dance and dance is ritual, and stories run around these performances, stories run around these actions that the participants are doing, performers are doing. Performance spaces in such productions or such performances are those which exist organically in the surroundings. These are the open spaces in villages, these are the courtyards and forests, open lands. These are not the performances which are staged in a very closed manner. Anybody and everybody can be part of the audience, or sometimes audience themselves are the performers, and there's this very organic fluidity that encapsulates the existence of all those who are part of such performances. You can see the two examples that are visible here as uh, Fulani men and women are dancing, and there is another picture that shows you the oral storytelling. Then other aspects of traditional theatre are that it's a group activity. Theatre is a group activity, and there is no boundaries between creators, performers, and audience. Unlike modern plays, traditional rituals and tales are not written by individual playwrights. So there is a text in such performances, but this text is not written by a playwright, but this text evolves through two practices. One is the practice of doing, the act of doing that performance. So there is a performance text which is visible. Then the other text that emerges is the storytelling, the story, the myth, the mythology, and the whole setup of the ritual, the whole arrangement of that performance, all that is text. So it is not easy to dissociate the text as one monolith out of such performances, because it is embedded in a very, very intricate manner. We can use the word immersive in a very different sense here, because the performers, the text, the audience are all immersed in a very organic relationship with each other, where they give birth to text by their existence, as well as they believe in a text that they inherit from their forefathers, from their seniors, and the society. Performative elements are the myths and legends that underpin African civilization, which are examined, explored, and revisited. When I say African civilization, I never mean to say that I'm trying to represent one particular kind of civilizational glory of this very beautiful continent, but I'm referring to its wonderful diverse cultures. I'm referring to its various practices and rituals, which are the storehouse and the source of myths and legends that are inherited by these performers. So they also inspire and pave the way for the elements that are part of the performances. So the performances of traditional nature examine, explore, and revisit these storehouses of myths, legends, and other cultural paradigms of their civilization. The traditional ceremonies that these performances look like um, also use mask, and mask is viewed as a material representation of a spiritual presence, ensuring the ancestors' presence among the living. It can also symbolize both animals and humans. So masks are very important uh, mechanism through which ancient performance cultures talk and represent a certain set of ideas and certain belief systems. In Africa also, we see the presence of masks as a matter of involving those who are not around, but certain identities that are important to be part of their performance, whether it's the forefathers, whether it's the invisible forces, whether it's nature, whether it's gods, all have to be represented, and they find a place in the physical world through the masks that the performers wear. And masks should be studied in detail. Masks. Now, moving on, we also should talk about the other components in African theatre culture, which include the ancient ritual dramas and dances of the Khoisa people of South Africa. One picture is there. This is an interesting representation and very popular uh, very popular dance drama, very popular dance performance. Then the spectacular masquerades performed in Sierra Leone, Nigeria, and Ghana. You can see some of the pictures which are presenting you the ideas of masquerades performance of Ghana. Then the song and ritual stories acted out by Xhosa and Zulu people in South Africa, Southern Africa rather, because these tribes are not just part of one country or the other, but they are spread over various countries. So there is a picture of Xhosa women who are putting on ritual, representing some ritual stories. This particular discussion that we are having today gives you a certain initial idea of the different traditional theatre performances in Africa, how they are uh, how they are existing in today's world, how they are competing in today's world with the modern theater practices, the trends of today's times. uh, there is a very interesting discussion that can be developed around this particular topic, and that is to what extent these have become stereotype representations of Africa. One must be very cautious in making sweeping generalizations of this is African theatre or that is African theatre, because it is, as I have been repeating many times, that it is not one big mass of a very unified nature, of a very homogenized nature, but it is a heterogeneity that has to be understood in its originality, in its entirety, only when we have close look at things. So the sources that I have used for today's discussion, the pictures have been borrowed from these links. Thank you very much. I hope you have got some food for thought on African theatre. See you in the next discussion.